Can I be honest with you? I've stood at 3 funerals in my life where I walked out more disturbed than when I walked in. Not because of the loss, because of what I watched people do in the name of grief. Death has a way of stripping everything false off the human heart. Whatever's really inside a person, it comes out at a graveside. And here's the part nobody wants to admit out loud. Many believers, without ever realizing it, are doing things at funerals that grieve the Spirit of God. Not every tear shed over a casket is holy. Not every tradition passed down through your family tree honors the Lord. I almost didn't make this video. Some of what I'm about to say is going to step directly on traditions your family has followed for generations without ever once questioning them. But somebody has to say it, because there are things people do at funerals, out of habit, out of pressure, out of grief so heavy it makes them desperate, that quietly damage their faith, dishonor the very person they came to mourn, and open doors that were never meant to be touched. Ecclesiastes 7:2 says it plainly. It is better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone, and the living should take this to heart. A funeral is never just a ceremony you sit through. It is sacred ground, and it demands the same discernment you'd bring into any other spiritual space, maybe more. We're not called to ignore grief, or pretend it doesn't hurt like nothing else in this life. But we are called to grieve differently than people with no hope. What you do at that funeral, what you allow into that moment, what you go along with just because it's tradition or because your family expects it, it can shape your spirit in ways you won't feel until years later. So here are 7 things you should never do at a funeral. Some of these are going to surprise you. And at least one of them is probably already a habit in your family, you just haven't had a name for it until now. 1. Never grieve as those who have no hope. 1 Thessalonians 4:13 doesn't ask us to be strong. It asks us to be informed. We do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. I remember standing at the funeral of someone close to my family, watching relatives collapse into a grief that had no bottom. No light. No anchor. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was despair, the kind that pulls people under and doesn't let go, and something inside me went quiet and uneasy, because I knew, even then, that our sorrow is supposed to look different from that. This doesn't mean tears are forbidden. Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, John 11:35, the shortest verse in the entire Bible, and one of the most powerful. Even the Son of God stood at a grave and wept, but his grief was never hopeless, because he already knew what was coming next. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. There is a specific moment, a single sentence, a particular tone of voice, where grief quietly stops mourning a person and starts accusing God. It happens fast, it happens quietly, and most people in the room never notice it happening at all. Once I show you what that moment sounds like, you will hear it at every funeral you ever attend again. 2. Never consult mediums or attempt to contact the dead. This is the most spiritually dangerous item on this entire list, and sadly, one of the most common, even inside churches, even among people who'd call themselves devout. I heard about a woman, devastated after losing her husband, who was talked into visiting someone who claimed they could deliver one final message from the other side. She didn't go looking for trouble. She went out of desperation. She just wanted 5 more seconds of him. One more word. What she opened that day was not closure. Deuteronomy 18:10-11 doesn't leave room for interpretation. Let no one be found among you who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. That's not a suggestion tucked into an obscure verse. It's a command repeated throughout Scripture, because God knows exactly how vulnerable grief makes a person. According to Luke 16, the dead are not lingering in the room, waiting to relay a message through a stranger for a fee. They are already with the Lord, or already separated from Him. Nothing in between. Which means whatever answered her that day in that dim little room, it was not her husband. So what was it? And why did it know things only he could have known? 3. Never turn the funeral into a stage for performance instead of worship. This one is subtle, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous. There are moments at funerals when grief quietly turns into theater, when the loudest cry in the room gets treated as the deepest love, and the person sitting quietly in the back, genuinely broken, gets mistaken for someone who didn't care enough. Proverbs 14:30 warns us, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." I've watched families turn a casket into a battleground, fighting in the parking lot over who gets to speak, who sits in the front row, who's allowed to be the most devastated, as if grief were a competition with a trophy at the end. That's not mourning. That's pride, wearing a black dress and calling itself love. A funeral is supposed to be worship, a reflection on how short life really is, pointing everyone in that room toward Christ. But there's one particular kind of performance that happens at almost every single funeral, one so normalized that people applaud it without realizing what they're actually watching. Once you learn to spot it, you will never sit through another eulogy the same way again. 4. Never bury unforgiveness alongside the body. This might be the heaviest point on the entire list. Families walk into funerals carrying decades of unresolved bitterness, and instead of using that final, sacred moment to let it go, they bury it deeper, telling themselves that since the person is gone now, the offense doesn't matter anymore, that there's nothing left to forgive, because there's no one left to forgive it to. But unforgiveness does not disappear when someone dies. It calcifies. It hardens into something that outlives the person who caused it. Mark 11:25 says, "When you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins." Read that verse again slowly. It does not say, unless the person has died. Forgiveness was never for the benefit of the one who hurt you. It's for the freedom of your own soul. I've watched siblings stand on opposite sides of a casket, refusing to even meet each other's eyes, letting a wound from 30 years ago win at their own parents' funeral. And here is what almost nobody tells you about unforgiveness buried at a graveside: it does not stay buried. It rides home in the car with the family. It sits down at the dinner table. And it resurfaces, months later, in a place nobody saw coming. 5. Never place your hope in rituals, objects, or superstitions instead of Christ. Every culture wraps its funerals in tradition. Certain items placed inside the casket, candles lit in a specific order, rituals meant to protect the spirit of the deceased on its journey, superstitions about what must or must not be done so the dead can finally rest. Colossians 2:8 warns us plainly, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ." Here's what makes this one so dangerous. None of these traditions feel dangerous while you're doing them. They feel like love, like honor, like something you owe the person in the casket. But many of them quietly teach that a soul's eternal rest depends on a ritual performed by the living, rather than on the finished work of Jesus on the cross. That substitution is happening in Christian households far more often than anyone admits, and there is a strong chance it has already happened in yours, without you ever calling it by its name. 6. Never gossip about the deceased or their family during the gathering. Uncomfortable, but true, funerals have quietly become one of the easiest places in the world for gossip to spread. Hallways and parking lots fill with whispered judgments. Did you hear how they really died? Do you know what really happened in that marriage? I always knew something was wrong in that family. Proverbs 11:13 says, "A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret." James 1:26 goes even further. "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless." I've watched a grieving widow overhear a conversation that was never meant for her ears, one that turned the single worst day of her life into entertainment for someone standing 20 feet away. That's not carelessness, that's cruelty, dressed in black and holding a tissue. And the most disturbing part of this entire point isn't the gossip itself, it's who is usually the one spreading it. 7. Never leave a funeral without examining your own readiness before God. Of all 7, this might be the one that matters most. A funeral is one of the only moments in life when eternity stops being an abstract idea and becomes undeniable. And yet so many people walk out of that building exactly the way they walked in. Untouched, unchanged, unmoved. Ecclesiastes 7:2 finishes its thought like this: "For death is the destiny of everyone." The living should take this to heart. A funeral is not just an event you attend and check off. It's a mirror someone holds up directly in front of your face, whether you're ready to look into it or not. Psalm 90:12 prays, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." So here's the question every funeral is quietly asking you. Whether you notice it or not, if that casket were yours today, would you stand before the Lord with confidence or with fear? Most people walk out already thinking about traffic, about lunch, about getting back to normal life as fast as they possibly can. But normal life was never promised to you, and the next graveside you're called to stand at could be far closer than you think. Funerals were never meant to be rituals we attend out of obligation and forget by the following week. They are sacred appointments, moments where heaven and earth stand closer to each other than almost anywhere else on this earth. Do not walk away from this one unchanged. Let the weight of eternity press into your chest, and let it push you closer to the cross. If this spoke to you, send it to someone who needs to hear it before their next funeral. Subscribe to keep growing in biblical discernment. And write this in the comments: I choose to grieve with hope.